Okay, so we are going to our next speaker, Roeland de Bruin.
Thank you very much.
Okay,
Isabel.
welcome. It's a pleasure to have you here. And now we are going to have the insights from the legal perspective. As you have noticed, this panel of speakers is a multidisciplinary panel, and it was conceived to address these issues from different perspectives. So now we are going to the legal one, I guess.
Thank you very much, Isabel. Is my presentation, is it displayed?
Yes, yes. It's good.
That's a good thing. Thank you very much again. I'm going to bother you with some thoughts on AI, privacy and trust. The subtitle of this presentation is Mind the Web of proposed and already in place EU regulations, because there are a lot and there are more incoming. My background is a lawyer. I work for Utrecht University, the Center for Access to and Acceptance of Autonomous Intelligence, for 1 day in the week, and for the other days I work as an attorney at law from an internationally oriented legal firm. What I'd like to do with you is to discuss the following, to share some insights with you from the European Union institutions where it regards how to regulate AI systems, where the European regulator seeks to find a balance between innovation and trust, as is displayed in the current General Data Protection Regulation and the proposed AI regulation, which is a proposal from the European Commission, and thirdly, a proposal from the European Parliament, which regards rules for creating civil liability for operators of AI systems. Of course, those two instruments I'm going to discuss, secondly, are still proposals, but it does sketch how rules might originate from the European Union level. So it's definitely something to take into account, I would say. Well, I'll save you this. Is a bit of background about me and about my institute. I will share this with you later on. And let's go back to the ambitions of the European institutions. These are high when it regards to promote innovation in the field of autonomous intelligence systems. The EU does, with almost virtually every other governmental institution in the world, I guess, at the moment, see the enormous potential of artificial and autonomous intelligence in terms of economy, in terms of contributing to solve ecological problems, to improve welfare, and last but not least, to distinguish the EU from other contingents in terms of international competition. So therefore, it really the EU really tries to stimulate to get innovation to the Union, and in doing so, it of course also recognizes that there are some risks involved, even some high risks involved, including which will come as no surprise, of course, which include ethical and societal issues, legal issues, and the overall. That's what I will focus on in the next 10 minutes or so. And it's also being concluded that the regulatory framework, which currently is applicable to the development and the deployment of AI systems, is underperforming, is inappropriate for fostering the necessary innovation. For instance, in terms of liability, for instance, in terms of employment or contract law, and of course, of privacy and other fundamental rights perspectives. So this being concluded, the Union seeks to overcome these problems, and it seeks to do that from a regulatory perspective, which should not be a surprise given the setup of the Union as it stands. So what the Union tries to do is to improve the factors that are currently inherent in regulation in order to better facilitate the conditions for innovators, but also for those who are to accept to deploy the outcomes of innovation in the field of AI. For innovators, they hold that legal certainty should be improved in the currently applicable and also the new rules. They hold that the rules should not be overly stringent in terms of red tape, in terms of administrative or compliance hurdles. And it is stated that the existing and the new rules should be flexible enough to cope with changing circumstances in technology, but also in society. The other side of the same coin is that the results of innovation should be, from a citizen's perspective, from a consumer's perspective, if you will, be acceptable. That implies, and I repeat the words of the European Parliament and Commission, which I will get into more detail a bit later on, should be trustworthy. So that the innovation in terms of AI should be trustworthy and, above all, safe. So they're thus navigating between innovation stimulation and acceptance stimulation, and that's not an easy task. Which can be illustrated in many ways. But let's take a brief look in two proposed regulatory solutions to the problems that have been indicated. The first is the EC proposal for a regulation, which dates from, the last version dates from 21 April of this year. And that's the regulation of artificial intelligence through Artificial Intelligence Act, which is supposed to work directly throughout the whole European Union from a certain date in the future. And the second is a proposal from the European Parliament regarding civil liability for artificial intelligence. And these two are to coexist and are to, be seen in each other's perspectives. This first proposal for artificial intelligence has as four aims to ensure that AI systems placed on the union market are used safe and respect existing law on fundamental rights and union values. And it repeats that legal certainty should be ensured to facilitate investment in innovation and AI. Furthermore, governance and effective enforcement of existing rights, existing law, fundamental rights, safety requirements should be enhanced, should be improved. And fourthly, the development of a single market for lawful, safe, and trustworthy AI applications should be facilitated, and market fragmentation should be prevented. Well, those are the aims of the general proposed AI regulation. It does two things. It prohibits certain applications of AI, which pose unacceptable risks to consumers of the Union, to citizens of the Union. And those risks are risks contravening EU principles, including fundamental rights. And this might include real life biometric identification in general terms, although in specific situations it shall be allowed, but when applied generally, this should be prohibited. And there's a list which is to be expanded in an annex which holds prohibited applications of AI. And high risk AI systems are to be allowed on the market, which are also to be listed in an annex, but which need to pass an ex-ante test, which requires to minimize the risks for citizens as much as possible, and where minimization is not possible, to list it and to be transparent and open to those confronted with those high risk AI. So there's an ex ante obligation to test in to what extent these risks remain in those AI systems, and there are ex post requirements as well, and these requirements relate to data and data governance, relate to documentation and record keeping, relate to transparency in how these decisions are made within AI systems, and it also holds that there also always needs to be human oversight on the processes being carried out by the AI, and of course the results of the AI application should be robust, accurate, and secure. Well, those are stringent obligations, I think, and we will see what the future holds. But these, I think, you can see as quite an interesting new form of regulation to those who want to deploy certain forms of AI on the European market. Should you not comply with these rules, you can face hefty penalties, which are to be given by the Data Protection Authority. I think that's what is now planned. Besides, and that may be the result of a new proposed regulation, you may be liable as an operator who does not comply with those proposed rules to pay to pay damages to citizens. And that's where the second proposed solution comes in, with civil liability rules for AI. And which comes from the European Parliament and still needs to be run through the other institutions, including the European Commission. So it's even more green than the proposed AI regulation. But the aim of the proposed CLAY is to make operators of high risk AI systems liable in two ways for any form of damage they might cause. The CLAY also distinguishes between high-risk AI systems and non-high-risk AI systems, and operators of high-risk AI systems, again listed in an annex, they will be strictly liable for any damage caused by the deployed artificially intelligent system, high-risk AI system, for all damages, including immaterial harm, which is new, well, relatively new in the EU, to compensate all those damages to a certain cap, unless, and that's the only escape, they can prove force majeure or hardship. So that's a real strict risk liability for operators of high-risk AI systems. Operators of non-high-risk AI systems are liable on a fault basis when someone can prove that the non-high-risk AI system caused damage to citizens or to companies, unless it can be proved by those operators that the system was and should not be activated without the operator's knowledge, and that the operator operated with all due diligence relating to the selection, operation, monitoring, and updating of the system. So it creates two liability regimes for operators of high risk and of non-high risk AI systems, which are to be deployed in the European Union as a whole. So in terms of the ambitions of the EU institutions when looking into stimulating innovation and creating acceptance, I think it is fair to conclude that these instruments do provide more clarity than the current rules, because the current rules are really fragmented and do not really address AI specifically. But I think it's questionable whether these implicate less stringency than the current rules. And I'm not too sure about the impact on citizens' trust in AI systems. May citizens, for instance, believe that their rights are more carefully observed after implementation of these rules than that would be the case now? I actually doubt it. And from a privacy perspective, it must be observed, and that's for the innovators to be observed actually. Besides these new stringent rules, you also have to take account of the GDPR, the General Data Protection Regulation, which still and also applies to operators and any other people who like to do something with the data which are inputted, processed, and or outputted by AI systems. So the GDPR is the General Data Protection Regulation, which sees to the protection of informational privacy of citizens within the EU. Informational privacy is not only codified within the GDPR, but it's also codified in the more overarching Charter of Fundamental Rights in the European Union. This set of rules, so to say, aims at creating a free marketplace EU-wide for the exchange of personal data while seeking to optimize citizens' trust in data processing technology, for instance through AI, by protecting by protecting the privacy of citizens and making them in control of their personal data. And it does so through very strict ex ante as well as ex post compliance obligations, which again are enforced union-wide through hefty penalties and also liability of those who do not comply with these rules. There actually is a problem when you apply these very strict rules to AI and other digital technology, I think, because at the moment, the GDPR prohibits certain forms of data processing through AI systems. They should, for instance, regard data processing through blockchain technology, and also when personal data are to be transferred beyond the borders of the European Union, especially when personal data are to be exported, so to say, to the United States of America. What's the case? Controllers of personal data, those who determine the goals and the means for data processing, need to implement adequate technical and organizational measures in order to ensure the security, the integrity, and the availability of the processed data. Those data could, for instance, include personal data which are logged, which must be logged as a result of the implemented proposed AI regulation. And there are strong rights of data subjects, citizens whose data are being processed, which, for instance, regard the right of access. So a citizen always has a right to see what is being processed of data regarding him. He has the right to correct the data should they be false when stored in a database. And they also have the right to be forgotten in certain circumstances. They have a right of erasure when their data are no longer needed, and when they had been necessary before and legitimately processed before. After the goal has been achieved of the original data processing, they have the right to be erased from the systems. So that is a problem when certain technology does not provide for these possibilities. For instance, blockchain is problematic in this sense. Blockchain could be a splendid way to ensure, which is required, the integrity of the processed data through, for instance, high-risk AI systems. It can be a very good way to ensure the integrity of certain personal data, to store these decentrally in more places than one. But then there's a problem in terms of compliance, because it's very hard, as I'm told, to change existing data which have been stored through blockchain technologies in several different decentralized spaces. let alone to erase these data. So that's very problematic, and I think it's intrinsically impossible to comply with the stringent GDPR rules when you are, as an AI producer, as an AI operator, who seeks to deploy blockchain technology to be compliant with the GDPR rules. That's one of the problems. And another problem concerns the export of personal data beyond the borders of the European Union. Because personal data may, in principle, not be exported to third countries, non-European Economic Area countries, unless this data export is based on an adequacy decision of the European Commission, a set of binding corporate rules which may apply within a multinationally operating company, when there are when one uses the EC, the European Commission standard contractual clauses, or when there are other appropriate safeguards in place, which is less likely. This has become very problematic after last year's decision of the Court of Justice of the European Union in the Schrems II case, in which it became clear that the privacy of European Union citizens is not adequately observed in the US, and it cannot be at this moment adequately observed in the US, as there are rules in the US which allow authorities to look into personal data in the clear when they become imported in the US. And therefore they invalidated the adequate decision that was in place, which was the European Union US Privacy Shield. And the European judges also said that another way to legalize data export to the US by means of standard contractual clauses can de facto also not be used anymore. So effectively, the personal data exchange between the EU and the US is prohibited, which, needless to tell, is a bit of a problem, also in terms of also for operators of AI systems, of course. Well, conclusion hereof is that privacy compliance is, as it stands, without being a deployer of an AI system, a very hard task to do correctly. It's effectively impossible when you are to deploy blockchain technology or when you are to export personal data to the US. There are very hefty enforcement risks, which can amount to 20 million per breach of the GDPR rules, and of course the civil liability of those who do not comply. And I think it's problematic in terms of innovation friendliness of the current and forthcoming GDPR and also the other regulations for AI innovators. And at the same time, I think it's likely that that not everyone will observe these rules. This also has a negative implication in terms of citizens' trust. When, despite all these risks and of non-compliance and the penalties and the other enforcement possibilities, when, despite all these risks, those data are being processed contrary to the principles of the regulation. So, we may conclude saying that the EU regulator has taken some steps to regulate AI. In these proposed regulations and also the GDPR, the EU seeks to navigate between stimulating innovation on the one hand and stimulating citizens' trust in AI technology on the other hand, but that the effects of the balance has not been found yet. I think there's ample room for improvement of both the proposed regulations and the GDPR. And that's very good for me personally, as there's ample room for lawyers to help improving the rules that are in place and are proposed yet. So that's what I would like to conclude. And now I'm very happy to hear all your questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for the very nice presentation. Unfortunately, we are completely running out of time. So my apologies to you. Any questions, please use the chat or contact Roeland. I lost, in the meantime, I lost one of the speakers of the session before lunch break time, but I think, Manuel, can you help me with the time, please? He's not there. Manuel, are you there? No? John, are you there?
I am here.
I think, yes, you are here. Thank you. We are during lunchtime, aren't we?
Let me check.
I think so.
No, Isabel, I think we have one talk, Alamari's talk now.
We had this talk, yes, but what time is the lunch? The lunch break at 4, right? At 5. At 5.
Yeah, it's at
okay.
5,
We would have 10 minutes for Muhannad, but I lost him. He's not here.
Okay, got it.
I have sent him an email, but he was here. I don't know what happened. So, Roeland, we have a couple of minutes. Everyone, please, may ask some questions, and then we'll go to the lunch break. Right, John?
That seems reasonable to me.
Yeah, so we've got a couple of minutes before lunch break. So go ahead, everyone. Legal questions or other.
Everybody got depressed.
No, impressed, not depressed. Selmer, please.
Yes, sorry, I'm not going to qualify if I have to have a law degree. So this is not going to be along that line exactly. But no, this seemed like this is really interesting. Thank you for that. And I want to apologize for my question, because it's not about blockchain technology, but it is about something, at least in the US, that's increasingly irritating to some AI researchers, and a concern in terms of different policies in different nations. But I have no idea what the EU is doing. And that's the domain of autonomous driving. So we have basically you talk about being employed from now till the end of the sun, when the sun burns out. You're right, but we have nothing. So I'm just wondering what your thoughts are about that application domain, because I can't figure out. We've had multiple fatalities now in the United States. We have cars that are driving themselves. As far as we know, there's just a general requirement. The human has to be ready to step in, but the humans are highly fallible in that regard. We have, as I said, fatalities. We've got the Uber accident in Arizona, which was tragic. Mike Giancola, who may still be online, has explored that. So my question is, what do you think about this? What does the EU think about it? And is there an emerging parallel breakage between the EU and the United States?
Yeah. It's a very prominent question, which does have the actual attention of both the US and the EU regulators. And this proposed civil liability rules for AI would apply to self-driving cars. So that nowadays we have a patchwork of 28 different regimes throughout the European Union, varying from very strict liability for drivers or owners of cars to actually no liability for autonomously made decisions by an Uber car or whatever. So that's going to be harmonized, and in the US there's also a patchwork of different rules applicable. What the EU seeks to do now is to make any operator of a self-driving car, as it is a high-risk AI system, strictly liable for any damage caused. That implicates that there will be an insurance system for self-driving cars, which does have some bad incentives, I think, for the safety of those vehicles. But that's what the European Parliament currently proposes to do. And I don't know what the US regulator is seeking to do, but I think they are trying to coordinate some aspects of taking the regulatory action.
Thanks.
Any other questions from the audience?
Yeah, I dropped mine in the chat, but just to, I'm interested in, you're talking about transparency and human oversight, which is obviously super important for AI, but given the complexity already existing in current AI systems, let alone future AI systems, I'm wondering how feasible this requirement is, both on face and also when you add the question of actually being able to innovate.
Well, it's hard for me to judge how feasible that is, but I do know that's just one of the goals of the regulator. So they want explainable AI, and they want to know how the algorithms work and how the decisions have come into existence. And I know from the industry that they always say, no, it's very impossible because we don't know how our own algorithms work. That may be a bit black, but the statement of the regulator to make any decision legible may be a bit white. So I think we may have to navigate between these as well. But I don't know what is feasible from a technical perspective. From a legal perspective, I think they're very adamant in this.
Good. I hope they can figure it out.
Yeah. What do the real AI people think of this?
Yeah. Real AI people, what do they think?
Sorry, what you put me on the spot there, Roland.
I'm sorry, but what do you think about actually, I'm referring the question of Anthony to you. Would you think it's feasible to make AI understandable and transparent for citizens?
Not at all where AI currently is, which is in an absolute craze and addiction with technologies that fundamentally exclude that. So you can't. We're speaking about cars, but you can't find out from an AI system running purely connectionist or statistical, et cetera, machine learning, what its structured argument is for why it did something. And if you don't have a structured argument and fairly demanding people in the public who are going to want not just explanations in terms of gobbledygook sentences, but a line of reasoning, we have to fix that. And I think that's going to be really tough. If you look at the law and what you do for a living, everything you do of high quality revolves ultimately, when you're trying to at least persuade, it revolves around really sharp argumentation and reasoning of a sort that is certainly not, it's declarative, it's not statistical or numerical. You asked,
Yeah, and I think from a legal perspective, legal reasoning is not always controllable, legible, understandable, and it's never transparent. So it might be much to ask for systems to be just that.
Well, you know the seminal article on privacy was I mean these are jurists in the United States, at least from the Occidental perspective in the U.S. Those are some pretty tight arguments that have nothing to do with gradually or quickly approximating a function based on large amounts of data. And I want to know why my car did X, Y, and Z. I don't want it to give me anything other after the fact. And that's what the insurance companies ultimately are going to want. That's what insurance adjusters do. So I don't know how this is going to work in the US. When you have an accident and the humans come out to it and they're hard-nosed insurance adjusters, they only deal in really determinate rationales for what happened, why it happened, to determine not just, there is no strict, in the case of divided responsibility for a settlement, that's also very declarative.
And maybe that's the only thing necessary, wouldn't it? In terms of trust for citizens, I don't know.
Yeah, but that would be that's a big thing to achieve in the current AI climate technically. That's a big thing to achieve. You probably know about the acceleration debacle in the case of, I think, Toyota.
Yes.
Right. So that code was such spaghetti code and impenetrable, but it was symbolic and traditional code. No one could figure out whether the accelerators really were getting stuck. So what do the jurists, the judges do? Not much. The situation is worse with machine learning, not better. So I don't know. I think it's going to be very interesting. I don't know how things work in the EU. In the US, we have a terrible medical system in terms of insurance. It's crazy. But our car situation is really well oiled, and the insurance companies are extremely competitive amongst each other, reasonable rates. But how they're going to react to more fatalities when they can't ascertain why something is happening is beyond me without going to strict liability. But we don't have that. I mean, maybe that's on the brink. I don't see it. That would be a completely different model than what we have, right? We have a model where you have to insure your vehicle. Your record dictates your rates and various other statistical parameters. And when something happens to you or someone else, then ultimately informal logic comes to the rescue to try to sort it out. You don't go into an impenetrable artificial neural network and do a backtrace.
No, and it shouldn't. But one thing I hope, one last thing I think it's interesting to just mention. When fatalities increase after deployment of autonomous cars, I think that will be dramatic for citizens' trust therein. Citizens' trust is way more affected by malfunctioning autonomous cars than it would from malfunctioning humanly driven cars.
Yeah, that's right. Okay, thank you so much.